You do independently and go ahead. Come down.
Yeah. So a very warm welcome to all of you. Good evening to all our viewers. We warmly welcome all our panelists, guests, as well as participants to the second lecture of the ILI webinar series. Today's topic is Law, Media and COVID-19 Issues and Challenges. I am Amit Raj, legal researcher, legal consultant, and an alumnus of Indian Law Institute, and shall be the convener for this webinar. Also, we have with us Ms. Upasna Singh as co-convener. She is Assistant Professor Law with Delhi Metropolitan Education, Guru Gobind Singh Indraparast University, and an alumna of Indian Law Institute. Before we proceed, dear participant, we would like to inform you with regret that our Professor Dr. M.R.K. Prasad sir will not be able to join us due to his ill health. He conveyed his blessings and good wishes for all of us. Let me request everyone to cooperate in the smooth conduction of this webinar. This needs 5 small points to be kept in mind. The first point, all attendees are requested to mute themselves. Second point, you are also requested to switch off your video mode for better transmission. Third, you can send your questions or comments in chat box with name and your current work area like student, research scholar, advocate, faculty, etc. Fourth, our alumni who is providing technical support may mute you all sometime for smooth running of this webinar. And finally, each member of panel gets 20 minutes. Once first round is over, we will go for a question answer session, preferably based on questions sent on chat box. We will try to take questions from learned member of the webinar.
Thank you, Amit. We take immense pleasure to share with all of you that this webinar is a part of a web series that Association of Indian Law Institute Alumni, that is ILIA, will be organizing on Wednesday of every week, dealing with socially, legally and politically relevant topic of the day. Association of Indian Law Institute, that is ILIA, is basically an association of alumni of the prestigious Indian Law Institute, New Delhi, located right opposite the Honorable Supreme Court of India. It was Indian Law Institute was established in 1956 and was formally inaugurated by the first President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, on December the 12th, 1957, at the Central Hall of Parliament of India, New Delhi, in the presence of First Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Honorable Mr. Justice S.R. Das, the then Chief Justice of India, and late Dr. K.M. Munshi, the then Executive Chairman of the Institute, and Professor L.R. Sivasubramanian, the then Dean Law Faculty, Delhi University. In these 65 years, the Institute, having the Chief Justice of India as its ex-officio chairman, has secured the rank of excellence in the field of legal research, both at national and international levels. Because of its high quality and in-depth legal research, further, the Institute is fortunate enough to have the wisdom and incisiveness of senior advocates, senior professors, eminent jurists, and legal scholars from time to time. Now, coming to the ILIA, Association of Indian Law Institute Alumni. Dear friends, ILIA means light. It symbolizes the age-old tradition of Guru Shishya Parampara. By this, the entire community of ILI alumni express their respect and gratitude to their alumni, to their alma mater, and to their teachers and seniors in the profession. It is also about spreading the light of knowledge in the matters of socio-legal importance into the society.
Thank you so much, Upasna. Now coming back to the webinar today, today's topic of discussion is Law, Media and COVID-19 Issues and Challenges. Freedom of the press has always been a cherished right in all democratic countries, and the press has rightly been described as the fourth stage. In India, there is no specific provision ensuring freedom of press as such, and it is implied from the freedom of speech and expression guaranteed by Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Constitution of India. When the world is fighting against COVID-19, it is critical to have independent and professional media, ensuring our right to access correct information in time-bound manner. Recently, the apex court of the country has directed the media to refer and publish official version about the development pertaining to COVID-19 pandemic in the country, triggering the discussion about the independent role media plays in a democratic country, particularly from the point of view of procurement and analysis of the information. Interestingly, it has been alleged that even before the court's proceedings, the topmost executive of the court has personally asked over 20 owners and editors from the mainstream print media to publish positive stories about the COVID-19 pandemic. This necessarily raises the concern about the ethical communicative practices of media in a democracy and possible threats associated with it. Further, open criticism by certain media houses of a certain minority community for particularly coronavirus in India has become a point of concern about how free is our media amid its own economic concern.
Thank you, Amit. And to discuss the topic at hand, we have an eminent panel before us. Professor Dr. Manoj Kumar Sinha, sir, Director, the Indian Law Institute and Chief Patron of ILIA. He is joining us as chief guest for the webinar program. Dr. Mohan Parasen, Joint Director, Lok Sabha, Parliament of India as speaker first, and Mr. Sudhanshu Ranjan, working with DD News as a TH senior journalist as speaker two.
Thank you, Upasna. Now we take this opportunity to welcome our chief guest for the day, Professor Dr. Manoj Kumar
Sound is
Sinha.
very less. Sound is very less.
Sir is
Nothing
the
is
director.
going to be here.
Hello. Hello. Sir is the director of the Indian Law Institute and also the patron of ILIA. Sir is an academician par excellence in the field of human rights, constitutional law, and international law. He did his doctorate in international law from Jawaharlal Nehru University, LLM from University of Nottingham, and LLB from University of Delhi. Sir has also served as professor at West Bengal, NUJS Calcutta, further as the director of Indian Society of International Law and also as secretary of All India Law Teachers Congress. Sir is dearly loved and respected by his peers, students, and legal fraternity. We welcome you, sir, and really thankful to you for your presence as the chief guest for our event. It is really kind on your part. Now, sir, I request you to have your words of wisdom.
I think I'll speak later, like, let the Sudhanshu ji begin, Amit,
Okay, sir.
Mohan ji and Sudhanshu, then I'll speak in the last.
Okay,
So,
sir. Okay, perfectly fine.
So
Yeah, it's perfectly fine.
Mohan sir, begin with the Mohan sir, and
Okay.
then you to the Sudhanshu ji, and then I'll speak in.
So now, without taking any more time, let me introduce you to our first eminent panelist, Dr. Mohan Parasaren, sir. Dr. Parasaren, sir, is Joint Director, Lok Sabha Secretariat, Parliament of India. He completed his Masters in Philosophy from Pune University in 2001 and went ahead and completed his Doctorate in Philosophy from Punjab University. He taught philosophy for a brief period of one year and went ahead and joined Lok Sabha Secretariat, Parliament of India in 2004. He also completed his Bachelor in Law from University of Delhi, Faculty of Law. He is passionate about philosophy and law and has authored many books. Particularly, read his book title as On Moral Law and Quest for Selfhood. Presently, he is working on the crossroad of moral philosophy, governance, and legitimacy. Sir, I welcome you and I request you to enlighten the August gathering. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Amit sir.
Yeah.
Respected Professor Sinha, respected Sudhanshu ji and other participants. Good afternoon all. First of all, I would like to thank the ILI Alumni Association for giving me this opportunity to speak before you, and especially to, I would like to inform the panel and all the participants that Amit sir was my teacher in Tips Valley University, and he taught me election laws.
Okay.
And I have very good memories of his lectures.
Thank you so much, sir.
And thank you for those wonderful 6 months that you have given to us.
Thank you, sir.
So today's topic, law, media, and COVID-19 issues and challenges. I know that most of the participants would be from legal fraternity, and they will be well aware of the legal, and they must have studied media law also. And from legal perspective and from the perspective of the media, we are aware of most of the issues. However, I would like to dwell in some uncharted territory, uncharted for a commoner, not for the lawyers and law professionals actually, and would like to speak on fundamental freedom in a state of exception. In this context, I am borrowing the term state of exception from one famous Italian philosopher, contemporary Italian philosopher, Giorgio Agamben. He talks about a biopolitical power that the state acquires in a state of exception, and state tries to continue with it even there is no state of exception. So this is the fear that all of us should have at the juncture when special laws are invoked all over the world, and those special laws are implemented on the basis of expert opinion that the governments are getting. And this kind of interference and curtailment of freedom, even though for the time being, even though for a temporary period, this could, we know it very well that the government, if given free hand, would definitely like to continue it because it gives tremendous power to them. And the process in which the exceptional process in which these things are going to be implemented in future, even in the post-COVID world, the bias towards executive supremacy is definitely be there. And that should be the fear amidst the legal professionals. Now, while explaining this fundamental freedom in the state of exception, I would like to dwell upon some of the social contract theories like Locke and also some utilitarians, particularly Mill, and then my main interest, Immanuel Kant. And yes, sir, you were saying something?
I think so. You can continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, to begin with, let me begin this way. There is a logical unity in legal order, and that order is always nourished by conflict of values. So, when we talk about values, from philosophical perspective, I am speaking. The same thing can be found in the Article 19 itself. When we talk about the values, these values, the two values that are in conflict in this context, in the context of today's discussion, are media freedom and reasonable restriction. The first one claims its legitimacy from people's right to know, from R.C. Cooper and from the initial, in the judgment of Supreme Court in the initial years of our republic. This has become clear that the people's right to know is the foundation on which media freedom is based. And now coming to the second value, that is reasonable restriction, which I believe is ingrained in the right to freedom of speech and expression itself. And this is derived from what Mill calls the harm principle. Let me quote Mill in this context. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others, unquote. In the context of media freedom, which is now inherent in the very fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression, it is enjoyed as a right on have to go to the reasonable restriction part of it. Even if you concentrate on the right only, then also the authorization for regulation is given by the constitutional makers to the government. Because people's right to know includes people's right to know the truth. And if truth is not being reported, then the government gets sufficient ground to regulate. However, this kind of regulation is not yet been theorized or legislated upon. But there is a scope if this infodemic, the so-called infodemic, the misinformation campaign, and in such a delicate time of pandemic, so much of misinformation campaign is being run. Yesterday or the day before only, there was a news item where it was claimed, rather internet in some internet platform, it was claimed that now Italian doctors have discovered that it is not a virus but some kind of bacteria, and there is a kind of blood clotting, and the entire protocol for treatment could be changed accordingly. But this found to be a misinformation. India Today has done a fact checking, and they have now revealed that this was a misinformation campaign. And the purpose behind is irrelevant. But if it is misinformation and it is misleading people to believe in that misinformation, then certain kinds of regulations can be expected from the government. It gives tremendous power to the government to make laws, to make regulations. So WHO has UNESCO chief has rightly said that the just like in war, truth is the casualty even in pandemic. And WHO has termed it as infodemic, the second disease which will follow the pandemic, COVID-19. Now there is abundance of information. Now how to choose which information is trustworthy? That's the problem. Therefore, we have now fact-checking programs in each and every channel, news channels, in online platforms. We have fact-checking programs, and online, the mainstream media has done a very good job, at least during last 3 months, while checking the reality and the misinformation. Now, when this new media emerged, the dissemination of information was decentralized. And there was a hope that now the fourth pillar of democracy has actually become democratic. That then the true spirit of democracy could be imbibed inside the fourth pillar of democracy. But that was still the Cambridge Analytica incident. Now, the problem, the traditional, all the flaws of the traditional media that people used to criticize. Now, traditional media will look like a saint, which is look at the new media and the manner it is spreading misinformation. And even election campaigns, even business models are being set up by with the use of data available in the social media platforms. So now the traditional media has got another responsibility to fact check the new media. This has become we cannot say that the traditional media is hunky-dory and everything is all right. There are many things, many problems with the traditional media also. For example, there are fear-mongering reports narrated with some apocalyptic background music, as if there's something big, the entire world is going to collapse. The United Nations is now predicting that the forthcoming disease would be a mental health crisis. And this kind of media, this kind of doomsday seekers, they have to be given a lot of credit for this. Such sensationalism coupled with rating bias, ideological affinity, and polarization, they have grown to such an extent that there is no longer battle of perspective. Now, if you see any prime time debate, there is no perspective because there are pre-settled convictions. When you come out with a pre-settled conviction, there is no scope for a discourse. And when there is no scope for a discourse, then you are not doing good to the people who whose right, on which right you are claiming your own existence. Your own freedom is based on the right of people's right to know. And but the thing is, when one person is asked to stand for or against an issue, he is asked to pre-settle his conviction. He is not being asked to evolve himself or his ideas. Now, this is the discursive violence that is being committed on freedom of speech and expression, and it is not committed by government regulations, unfortunately, but the very terms of the discourse. The very term of the discourse, the very business model of the discourse, is compelling you to commit a discursive violence on the panelists, and then on the people at large. So when everything is decided on the binary logic of prime time debate, we don't need a regulator or a state to restrict your freedom. This now, I would like to give one example. This emergence of post-truth world is best exemplified when we see, recently we have seen that 3 private channels are simultaneously claiming that #1 in a particular rating. All of them are claiming, and their source is the same rating agency. How can 2 persons or 3 persons claim that they are #1? And this kind of post-truth world we have entered into. Now, coming to the whether these things can be regulated with the help of laws. Do we have laws to regulate them? Do we have sufficient teeth in the Code of Conduct of Press Council Act? Do we have sufficient ground on which such cases could be covered even under Section 505 of IPC? But unfortunately, it deals with fear mongering with intention to incite communities against one another, and not in such fear mongering where it could cause a damage to the psyche of a person, but the person doesn't have any remedy for it. Now, the Code of Conduct under the Press Council Act, it talks about self-regulation. But do you think that the self-regulation is any kind of regulation? If all institutions like media, legislature, judiciary, if they do not want anyone other than themselves to check upon themselves, what will happen to the cross-institutional accountability that a democracy presupposes? Democracy, on the very foundation of it, presupposes a kind of cross-institutional accountability. One institution is to be held accountable by the other institution, but judiciary doesn't want to be touched by legislature. Legislature has its own privilege, and media wants self-regulation. What is the harm in letting everybody regulate everyone? I mean, letting everybody have a say in everyone's affair without having the fear of contempt of court or breach of privilege or media freedom or impeaching the media freedom. Now, another point is, when irreverence, that is the reverence to no one, is the principle that journalism adopts for everyone else. Reverence to no one. I should not be bowing down to any authority. And there is no reverence. But how can the same media perceive itself as a totem or a sacred object and invoke constitutional right when any other person or any other institution or any other body tries to regulate it? It may not be a state. The media may not be a state as per our constitutional jurisprudence or even our judicial interpretation of Article 13. However, it performs a kind of public function of dissemination of information. Now, and it is well known as the 4th pillar of democracy. Therefore, even within Article 19, I think the freedom, the right to freedom of speech and expression, it also casts some kind of responsibility and duties to the media, because the same freedom is being interpreted by the media or even by the judiciary, when the issues pertaining to the media have come to this, to prove that the people's right to know is the foundation on which media is claiming the right. Now, coming back to the pandemic situation, now everyone is saying that the social distancing is going to be new normal, and in future, transportation, office spaces, schools, public architecture, everything has to undergo drastic change. And along with that, our way of life could also be changed. And in order to, in that change, in that situation, when everything is going to be changed, some new regulations could also be possible. New regulations could also be possible because government cannot, the government or the state cannot stay aloof when these changes are so imminent. Now, the fear that we should have at this juncture is whether this kind of state of exception, borrowing again Agamben's term, the state of exception, it also be a new normal. Here comes the role of legal fraternity, opposition, and media, not to allow this state of exception to become a new normal. Now, Agamben follows Michael Foucault's idea of biopolitics. Biopolitics, what is biopolitics? He says the power over human life has always been implicit in the idea of sovereignty. That the very idea of sovereignty is, it consists of the idea of the sovereign having control over your life. And this power may further enable the state to curtail our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech and expression in an unprecedented way. Now, these emergency powers have a worrying tendency to become permanent, and this is a truism. There is no denial to that fact. There is no, the content regulation in reporting sensitive health issues, etc. These things may continue for a time being, unless and until there is a strong opposition from the legal fraternity or media. Now, let me come to another philosophical group which is very popular around the world, libertarians. They are the advocates of minimalist state. They argue that all paternalistic laws are unjust. And they say that this is simply because the very assumption that state must not curtail freedom even for my own good. I should be given absolute freedom. But the hypocrisy of this libertarian and our own libertarians, when you follow Twitter, and you find that there are many people who believe that Arogya Setu is a breach on my privacy, and they will be happily arguing that in a Zoom application. Zoom application, after all, is an enabling platform giving me freedom of speech and expression. And Arogya Setu is paternalism. It is not good because it is paternalistic. This is how the hypocrisy of the libertarians is being exposed. Now, coming to the biopolitics, this compulsory vaccination, smoking ban, prohibition laws, all these things are examples of biopolitics, and they indicate to the political and ideological dimension of health policy. However, they are not enforced by the totalitarian state. What we need to understand today is our democratic state is not imposing these things, smoking ban or prohibition laws, like a totalitarian or a despot. They are their product of a discourse. They are result of a democratical discussion, their collective decision making based on available knowledge and the part of the collective effort to care for others and ourselves. So, invoking these terms like biopolitics, necropolitics, and romanticizing a particular kind of dystopia we are going to enter into, this is far away from the reality of a modern statecraft, particularly the Republican government, democratic government. Now, the governments, if we understand, if we at least try to understand in this situation sympathetically, that the state is also is not the Hobbesian Leviathan, but it is the grim executioner. And blaming them for doing their job is not a political reflection. There has to be some kind of political maneuverability to justify that the grim executioner or the government or the state which is doing all this, They are doing their job. When viral fake news, social media, conspiracy theories, they damage the public good, the state acquires more power to regulate them. You can't deny it. And this power is not derived from the extraneous source of totalitarian zeal, but it is ingrained in the Lockean contract itself. How it is ingrained in the Lockean contract? Because protection of life and liberty is the currency with which the state buys our political obligation. It is the people who demand social change with a life-saving exigency. And the state only responds to it. And democratic governments will be failing in their duty if they do not respond to it. So the contemporary discussions on biopolitics and law, therefore, they need to liberate itself from this sphere of post-World War European philosophers like Agamben, and who is this Foucauldian generalizations. It has now lost a sense of proportion. If we consider that the very existence of state is a limitation to our freedom, then we are arguing for anarchy, not for democracy. Now, in the Kantian paradigm also, the state is not an impediment to freedom, but it is a means for realizing freedom. It only hinders the hindrance caused to it. The state hinders the hindrance caused to our personal freedom. It can be secured, that is, it can be secured only within the framework of a state. And under such circumstances, when there is a pandemic and there is an exceptional situation, only a strong state can secure our right to freedom. The constraints to freedom, of course, there are many constraints to our freedom: prudence, morality, public good, and they cannot be balanced without a state. Therefore, we have a duty to enter into the social contract to establish the legal order that I have talked about in that introduction. So the conflict of values that foster this legal order needs to assimilate both what Kant would have said, our duties of virtue and duties of right, moral obligation and legal right. So this balancing can be done only by the state. First, the duties of virtues are one which is enforceable by the internal tribunal, moral obligations, etc., and the other one by the legal framework. So even I was quoting Kant initially, and even in Kantian framework, freedom, what he says about freedom is not a hollow idea, but it is intricately connected with the autonomy of the will. Autonomy of the will. And that autonomy of the individual is maintained by giving objective information on it. And if there is maneuverability and misinformation campaign, then the autonomy of the individual will is violated. However, when presented as a gospel and a final say with a decisive headline, whether it is in print media or in electronic media, the information commits a kind of epistemic injustice on the listener. And what is this epistemic injustice? You are not allowing him to know. You are not allowing him to think. And particularly because of the health emergency, the audience is already vulnerable. Committing this epistemic injustice must require another set of media jurisprudence and regulation. This is what I had in my mind when I heard about the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your inspiring and wonderful thoughts. And now we are moving towards Mohan sir. After the first round, we will open for questions. So I'm inviting the second speaker now, and then
right,
after the first.
Okay.
Right, sir.
Just a minute, Upasana, just a minute. I would like to say certain things about this speech. Sir, I was listening to your speech, and you have explained everything in a very comprehensive and philosophical manner. You have started your discussion with the observations of the Italian philosopher. Thereafter, you have talked about the social contract theory. Thereafter, you have discussed about the cross-institutional accountability in a democratic country. That's very important for all of us to understand and deliberate upon. Apart from that, sir, you have been very much vocal about some leading, jurisprudential authors and philosophers like Immanuel Kant, where he talked about autonomy of individual, John Locke about libertarian thoughts, and Salman sir. I'm really thankful to you, sir, for your wonderful speech. And I must say that it is one of the best speeches that I ever heard. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Please continue, Upasana.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you for summing it up. I would not have done a Similar job, thank you. Now, I would like to invite Sudhanshu Ranjan, sir. Sir has completed his graduation in English honors from Patna University and went on to complete his bachelor's in law and master's from University of Delhi, Faculty of Law. He joined Doordarshan in 1988 and attended as well as covered many international and national conferences like SARC, ASEAN, G8, G20, etc. Because of his profession as a journalist, he traveled around the world with politicians, social activists, and diplomats. The busy life of a journalist did not stop him from contributing articles to leading international and national newspapers. And he also contributes in media journals, both in English and in Hindi. He authored biography of a well-known political figure, Jayaprakash Narayan, titled as Jayaprakash Narayan, Prophet of People's Power, both in Hindi and English, published by National Book Trust. He also authored Justice versus Judiciary, published by Oxford Publication, and which was also referred to by the Honorable Supreme Court of India in the landmark fourth judge's case, namely Supreme Court Advocate on Record Association versus Union of India, 2014, for the purpose of conceptualizing issue pertaining to the controversial National Judicial Appointment Commission amendment. We look forward to hear from you, sir. Kindly address the viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, Upasana. A minor correction. The book that you talked about that the Supreme Court referred to was Justice, Judocracy and Democracy in India, not Justice versus Judiciary. That was published in 2012.
Right,
And
sir.
this book, Justice versus Judiciary by Oxford, that was published last year, 2019, April. So the minor correction, not a big mistake.
Thank you, sir.
And I first of all must congratulate Mr. Mohan that he has given a very profound philosophical background to what he said. And 2-3 things that he raised, I would like to carry forward. First, truth, then post-truth. Many philosophers he has referred to, like Immanuel Kant and others. So the question arises, what is truth? You are talking about this COVID pandemic and the challenges that the media is facing in the context of this pandemic. So I think the challenge is not new because the media has been under crisis, I think, continuously. Whenever there is a crisis of national, international scale, whether there is a crisis inside the country, there is a war, or there is some time of, what should I say, the government is trying to suppress or oppress, or the government wants to take some drastic measures and it wants that the media should be controlled and media should propagate what the government wants. So every time, I think most of the times are not normal times. It's abnormal most of the time. I don't know why there was so much of hullabaloo about this post-truth when in 2016, when the book came out, and then it became the word of the whole year because the Oxford Dictionary said that post-truth is the word of the year. I personally can't understand why so much of importance was given, because whatever little I have read, I can tell you that right from the inception of the civilization, it is the republic of untruth. Truth has not ruled the roost. Truth has not ruled over the world. It is the untruth which is ubiquitous, which has really ruled the roost, and it is the republic of untruth in every age, every time. And so is true of justice, because justice is based on truth. So we talk of justice, but people hardly get any justice. Now there are talks that the Supreme Court in times of crisis is comatose, not entertaining any petition when lakhs of laborers are on the road. So these things have come up and people have given their opinions. I don't want to go into that, but I would only like to say that the challenge is not new. The media has been facing this challenge and all the institutions face. And you want some laws to be made to regulate. I don't think any law could regulate the media, because that will be the remedy will be worse than malady. We did not grant a fundamental right of press because the constitution makers thought that there is no need, because journalist, like any other citizen of the country, will have the freedom of the speech and expression. The misfortune of this country is that though we had illustrious people in the Constituent Assembly who gave a very wonderful constitution, gave all sorts of freedoms and liberties, but the same body, the Constituent Assembly that was converted into provisional parliament, the same body also amended the constitution. It started curbing the freedoms that this body had given when the constitution was adopted on 26th November 1949, and then it was converted into interim parliament. That body also brought about the first constitution amendment that was challenged, and the Supreme Court at that time was not very active, and so it okay, no, it's all right, there is nothing wrong, nothing unconstitutional. And we find in the first decade itself, when we had a liberal Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, who did not like this kind of freedom, who said that gagging the press is worse than what a free press with all its sensationalism can wreak. It will wreak havoc, but if you gag the press, it will be worse. Just like Jefferson, who said that gagging the press will be worse, or just like James Madison, who said that if you start pruning any tree, then you also be pruning those branches which are bearing luscious, very juicy fruits. You will not be only cutting only those poisonous branches, but also those branches who have very sweet fruits. So we always think that if you give liberty, it will be misused, but curbing it will be worse. I will give you some examples because we have limited time, so I can't go back very far, but I will give you a few examples from myths or history or whatever you think. Sometimes I don't know whether it is myth or history, but take the example of Mahabharata. If you have read the Mahabharata, it is okay, or you might have seen recently on Doordarshan. It was telecast. What do you find? There you find fake news, because the Pandavas could realize, or Lord Krishna could realize, that so long as Acharya Drona was the commander-in-chief of the Kauravas, it was not possible to vanquish them. So what to do? So you have to create an atmosphere where he is depressed, and that can be done through fake news that his son Ashwathama, if he's not killed, at least the fake news is spread that his son has been killed, and that is what they did, violating all code, that they kill an elephant named Ashwathama, and then Bhimsen goes and shouts in front of him, Ashwathama, Hatao Ashwathama, because I have killed Ashwathama. And when he wants to verify from Yudhishthir, he also nods, because Yudhishthir was a Dharmaraj, and nobody thought, and even Dronacharya was very sure that Yudhishthir would never lie, so he went to cross-check with him, and he said, Ashwathama Hatau, and then Narovo Kujro, in an indistinct, feeble voice, which was drowned in spread, and even with the help of God. In this case of Mahabharata, you have with the help of Lord Krishna, and there you have with the help of Apollo and Zeus. When the fight is going on, the fight is between Achilles and Agamemnon. First, Achilles was the commander-in-chief of Agamemnon. They had plundered a city. Taken them prisoners, and they also took prisoner one girl who was the daughter of Chryses, and Chryses was the priest of Apollo. And I don't want to go into that long story. Ultimately, what does God do? Because they send a dream to Agamemnon, go and fight, and then they are defeated because Achilles was to be held. So this is a long story, and myths you also find. Right from the beginning of civilization, we find that it is the untruth which has been disseminated. So there is no such thing as misinformation or disinformation which has come into circulation these days. I think it is the part of his civilization. As soon as the man dressed up himself, because when you said that I'm cultured, I'm civilized, and you call them barbarians, you call them uncivilized, the tribal people, those tribal people who are not dressed up, they don't lie. They are truthful. The moment you dress yourself, you also dress your words, and there you create untruth, you create falsehood. In 1562, when the ship from Antarctic France came back to France, and Antarctic France was in Latin America, because that was the time when the new world was discovered by being discovered by Western powers which had developed. Whole countries are, sorry, I'm coughing. France, then England and other countries, they are conquering new lands and they had developed a new doctrine of discovery. And on the basis of that, they were capturing land. We have discovered that land and the native people have no right because they are barbarians. And Mr. Mohan was talking about Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was the biggest racist I have seen and I have read, because it was Immanuel Kant and David Hume who said that the blacks cannot be creative. It is the only whites who are creative, who have intelligence, and who have got every right to rule over the blacks. So Immanuel Kant was the biggest racist. I don't think I cannot find any reason how does it talk about virtue and morality. A person who was so rabid in his thinking that he says that only whites can be creative. What nonsense did he talk? And we find that right from the beginning, there are scientists, there are philosophers who are proving the superiority of the white race. And then Kipling went on to say that it is the white man's burden who are going to civilize. It's not that we are conquering lands. It is white man's burden. We are civilizing those people, those barbarians, and those barbarians loved justice. What I was talking about in 1562, when the Antarctic France, that ship had come back from that because they were naming the country after themselves and they had conquered. So 3 tribals had been brought to that city, Paris. Hordes of people were coming to see because they did not know from where they're coming. The world was not so small as we are seeing it today, because you're crossing the sea, you don't know what kind of people are living on the other side of the sea. And so many people came, even the king of France, it was Charles IX, a 12-year-old boy came. And with all robust, very sturdy security guards, he came and all were supplicating before him. And these 3 people were taken around the city of Paris, and then they were asked about their experience. Michel de Montaigne has recorded his experience in his very famous essay of Cannibals. And they were asked, what did you find? Then Montaigne says that they said 3 things. I have forgotten one, but I remember 2. One is that a sickly boy of 12 years, he is the king and he is surrounded by so many sturdy, robust people. I don't know why are they supplicating before him. One of them could have become king. Why are they so scared of him? And then you find so much of inequality that there are palaces, there are big mansions which have got every kind of amenities and facilities. They are floating in affluence, and there is hunger, there is famine. What kind of poor people who don't have even their meals day and night? What kind of society it is? So when they were asked, what are you doing in your country? They said that we don't think everyone is half. I am half of the other individual. If I am hungry, then other will be hungry. We cannot take food unless the other one takes food. They have a better sense of justice. And these whites, the so-called civilized, the so-called cultured people, had the monstrosity, had the effrontery, and had the audacity to call them barbarians, to call them savage. And it was justified even scientifically. So we had the philosophy of eugenics. Eugenics, what is eugenics? That you are trying to improve the race, that only the people with more intelligent brains, they should have the power to procreate and reproduce. And that was given support even by Theodore Roosevelt, the president of USA, who said that these lower class and middle class people are reproducing so many children and our race is being threatened. We shall become extinct. So Galton was the progenitor of this theory, eugenics. And you find not only he, I find a long list of scientists who are proving how whites have got better brains. It is the superiority of brains. They are more intelligent, and it is because of genes. They have better genes. Blacks don't have that kind of genes. So they are born to serve, and we are born to rule, because it has been decided. It has been decided by the nature that we have been provided superior brains. And the philosophers like Hume, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant, they justified it. So that kind of society we have, unjust society. And legally speaking, you go to America, which says that it is the oldest democracy, one of the youngest nations, but the oldest democracy. And the Chief Justice John Marshall in 1823, he gave a judgment in Johnson versus uh, Tosh, when he said that the natives will have no right under the doctrine of discovery, because people who have discovered the land will have full rights over the land. But because there was so much of criticism, that in 1831 and in 1832, Roorkee versus Georgia, and in another case, Worcester versus Georgia, he considered some of the rights of the natives. So if you say that truth is a casualty these days, I totally refuse to accept. Truth has been a casualty in every age since the inception of civilization. Justice has been a casualty from the inception of civilization. It is a brute society, the powerful rule, and then you have such doctrines like survival of the fittest, a scientific doctrine, which I find that one of the most dangerous expressions, because in present day world, I think that it will be misconstrued, it's not misconstrued, but construed, that people who can adapt according to the ideology of the government, the biggest flatterer, sabse bada jo chamcha hai, he is fit to survive, because the honest people cannot adapt themselves. So they are not fit to survive. So we have these doctrines, and you say that truth is a victim these days. No, not at all. You show me the person, I will show you the rule. So all the people in the position of powers, their wisdom is covered by hubris. They have so much of arrogance, and arrogant people cannot do justice. So everyone knows that untruth will be disseminated. When Nietzsche, the great philosopher, generally he is mispronounced as Nietzsche, in 1779, he fell seriously ill at the age of 37. So he lost all hope of survival. And he told his sister, please remember that when I am taken to grave, only my friends and you will be there, so that if other people come, then there will be misinformation. And I want to leave this world as an honest pagan. So no wrong news should be spread. And he gave this doctrine of prospectivism. He said that there is a perspectivism. Everything is rooted in perspective. Truth is not the same for everyone. It depends on the perspective that you have. I will give you one example. One person broke his leg. So someone asked, how did he break his leg? The surgeon said that his tibia hit the curb. His wife says that some fool had dropped banana skin on the road. His colleague says, oh, he's an absent-minded fellow, always keeps thinking about something. He fell down. And one psychiatrist says, subconsciously he wanted a leave. Now four are giving four answers. I am not creating some new story. It has been said by Otto R. Fish, a great scientist. There is a book, Encyclopedia of Ignorance. You generally have Encyclopedia of Knowledge, but here is an Encyclopedia of Ignorance. The first chapter is Why, and that is written by Otto R. Fish. Why did John break his leg? And you get these four answers. All the four answers are correct. There is no lie. No answer is wrong, but all the answers are different. Now, what is the truth? So truth, as the Jain philosophy says, it is Syadvad, Anekantvad, it is multifaceted. If you say truth is only one and absolute, then there will be fanaticism and you will be producing terrorists that Pakistan and Kashmir are producing or other parts are producing, because if you accept my version of truth, it is okay, otherwise I shall behead you. So that is the kind of truth we have, because we say that it is absolute, it is final, my thinking is final. You have to give a scope to others. Unfortunately, we have become so arrogant, and some of the people in the positions of power are bigger terrorists than these mercenaries, than fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists, because they are so arrogant that they don't want to do justice, they don't want to hear the truth, and so everyone around them are chamchas. Yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes prime minister, yes minister, yes secretary, yes this, that kind of culture we have developed. Chamchagiri hai, chamchagiri ke alawa kuch hai hi nahi. And then you think that the truth should flourish. because people who have been speaking out the truth, who have been speaking up, they have been beheaded, they have been executed. Who stands for the truth and who stands by the truth? And you say media has its own agenda. Those people who are doing business, they are not running channels or newspapers for the benefit of the society. They are doing it for their own business. And a businessman who has got other businesses, they have got wagon factories, they have got other things. Do you think that they would be able to antagonize the government? And there was a bill in parliament, there was private members bill introduced in 1976 for delinking big businesses from the media. If you are running a media house, you should not be allowed to run any other business. But that did not happen because there is a big lobby. So truth is the first casualty. All these media houses are spreading lies. They have their own agendas. No individual, no capitalist should be allowed to run any business house. It is all right to have revenue for the purpose of running a newspaper or running a news channel. But if you are mobilizing revenue for that purpose, it is okay. But if you are running or a business newspaper or television channel for the purpose of mobilizing revenue, it is most unethical, most dishonest thing, and that is not the purpose of the media. So if you think that there should be a debate, there should be a debate whether individuals should have the power to own a newspaper. No. Only a trust should have this power. There should be a new debate in the country that only a trust should run the channel, a trust should run the newspaper. And all these intellectuals, he was referring to Immanuel Kant. We have dishonest people like Immanuel Kant who believe in the supremacy of one caste, one group, one race. We are not honest people. We are not objective. We are dishonest people. And we use our intellectualism to spread the whole falsehood. This is correct, this is wrong, because you are a big intellectual, so you can say, you can talk any nonsense. And that is being spread by media. So all these intellectuals, they are the biggest hoax. They are the biggest liars in this world. Honest people, you go to the tribal society, they will find that they are honest people because they are not intellectuals. They don't have these kinds of intrigues. They don't have these kinds of juggleries to justify whatever wrong you do, and you justify. So all these newspapers, all these scholars, all these learned men, they are the biggest threat to the society. Only the illiterate people are the hope for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, sir. I think, Amit, we should invite a director, sir.
Yeah, but before that, there are certain things that I would like to speak about his speech. Thank you so much, sir. You have been very vocal about the historical perspective relating to.
Actually, there might be a certain. There might be a certain.
Of the media, and you have started based on. Yeah, so that's a very wonderful perspective, sir, and that you have concluded your argument with the observation that that only the illiterate people are hopes. That's another way to work with it, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. We are looking forward to your views and perspectives, sir. Thank you, sir.
And I particularly like the Encyclopedia of Ignorance bit, sir. I'll definitely Google it, read it. It was a very insightful speech. I think. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now we invite director, sir, to address the viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashna. Thank you, Amit. And after hearing Mohanji and Sudhanshuji, I think I took a right decision, because Mohan started with theoretical perspective, and Sudhanshuji, as usual, has deeper understanding, and he spoke in length about the importance, and other criticized also. Let me begin with on the topic, which is narrow, I just focused, and some points. Particularly law, media, and COVID-19. There are 3 points, the focus of this today discussion is law, media, and COVID-19. So what role media will play? So our concern, it seems to all of us, that how media can play a very important role, and media has been playing very important role, and media has to play. There is any attempt to restrict media to stop sharing the knowledge and information regarding the right to health, right to livelihood, right to like right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So any rights, if media is blocked, then the enjoyment of the human rights of the individual will be affected. There is no doubt. So, as Sudhanshu ji has correctly said, there should there should no attempt to regulate the media. And when we compare the U.S. Constitution and Indian Constitution, U.S. Constitution has fundamental rights and as well as the Indian Constitution. What is important? What is the distinction between the U.S. Constitution and Indian Constitution? In US Constitution, rights are just like as a bone. So court interprets and put the flesh and meat in the rights. So interpretation is like, and more or less it's absolute. If you look into the US Constitution, whereas in the Indian Constitution, it's a limitation is there. And particularly when we look into the limitation, gradually it started with the first constitutional amendment. And if I remember correctly, this was the month where the Constituent Assembly debate took place regarding the first constitutional amendment for the Article 19, Clause 3 for the Article 19 that took place in month of May, and it finally culminated in that. I would like to highlight two important points. What Jawaharlal Nehru spoke in the Lok Sabha debate, and also Dr. Ambedkar also spoke in the parliament. Both were in favor of the amendment, putting the condition, and there are three conditions which they relations with the foreign states, public order, and incitement to offense. These are the three important they thought about and they wanted to introduce. And what was the genesis? So I'll just find out. I'll just read out a paragraph which Nehru has spoken in the parliament. There was opposition. Like many people said, why should we change? As Sudhanshu ji has correctly mentioned, the 1950 constitution entered into force, and within 1 year and a half, you go for the damaging the Article 19, which has been you struggled almost 2 years, more than 2 years to draft the constitution, and within a year, you started thinking about the change. This change could have taken during the Constituent Assembly, more or less the same members. So even Ambedkar sir has a different view about that amendment, and he supported. So let the which Nehru spoke in the parliament. So there was opposition, and particularly Syama Prasad Mukherjee was very vocal against the amendment of the first Constituent Assembly. And this debate has come from after the select committee looked into this bill, and then it came to the parliament for the debate. After amendment, it was adopted. What Nehru said, just he said, I want to, I have also drawn attention to the way, and he criticizing the less responsible news seats. He said the less responsible news seats are conducted, and it has become a matter of the deepest, and it has become matter of the deepest distress to me to see from day to day some of these news sheets which are full of vulgarity and indecency and falsehood, day after day, not injuring me or this house much, but poisoning the mind of the younger generation, degrading their mental integrity and moral standards. And he said, it is not for me a political problem, but a moral problem. So it is not a problem. So he was thinking so you can imagine 1951, what kind of information or news items he had seen and found indecent and vulgarity. So definition of 1950 has lot of changes has taken place in. Now you come to the Ambedkar ji. Ambedkar ji, what he said, and he said a question was asked. So he said clause 2 of Article 19, as members will see this subclause propose three things, three new heads. So he says relation with the foreign states, public order, and incitement to offense. So he said this, and then he goes further, and he states a question was asked as to what was the necessity for introducing these new heads. So these three ones, what was the necessity? Then he said the necessity has arisen out of certain judgment. So he took the help of the case decided during that particular time by the Supreme Court and also Provincial High Court. So he said the necessity has arisen out of certain judgments which have been delivered by the Supreme Court as well as by the Provincial High Court. I would like to refer in this connection to the judgments of the Supreme Court in Ramesh Thapar's case and in Brij Bhushan's case. So he mentioned two cases decided, Ramesh Thapar's case and in Brij Bhushan's case. These are two judgments in the Supreme Court. Then I come to the judgments of the State High Court. And he said the following judgments of the Punjab High Court may be taken into consideration. First, Master Tara Singh's case, and second, Amarnath Bali versus the state of Punjab. And then he also mentioned there are two judgments of the Patna and Madras High Courts. That is like, Selvala Devi versus Chief Secretary of Bihar and Bans versus the state of Madras. So these cases he took for the three proposed amendments. So he started looking into, he started interpreting, and he started realizing the interpretation of the Supreme Court and High Court more in a traditional manner, where they said, the way is the black and white interpretation of the fundamental rights, which might have not in the mind of the constituent members of the Constituent Assembly. And then he says, little bit, I'll just read out. In Ramesh Thapur's case, what was involved was the validity of Madras Maintenance of Public Order, 1949. Brij Bhushan's case involved the validity of East Punjab Public Safety Act, 1949. Master Tara Singh's case involved the validity of sections 124A and 153A of the Indian Penal Code. Amarnath Bali's case involved the validity of section 4 of the Indian Press Emergency Act of 1931. And Selvala Devi's case also involved the validity of section 4 of the Press Act, and the same was involved in the case of Bynes versus Madras State. All these cases have resulted in the decision that they are void laws. That is to say, in view of the provisions contained in clause 2 of Article 19, the courts have held that all these acts, however valid they might have been before the Constitution came into existence, are bad laws because they are inconsistent with the fundamental rights. So he attacked, and then he suggested for that. So in the so interpretation of that particular, so this they say some way Ambedkar analyzed his interpretation on the cases of decided by the High Court and Supreme Court of India. I leave it here. I thought just to discuss here, and then we go back. We start with the COVID-19 situation, and let me clarify that I am also with Sudhanshuji and many others. Media should not be regulated. Any attempt to regulate, not even the content or everything, there are a lot of exercise, there are a lot of studies where people are saying that content regulation or self-regulation, voluntary regulation, or media can also evolve a mechanism within any in-house mechanism where a writer or where a reader or where a reporter or editor writing something, it has to be vetted by 2-3 people, so some kind of many people are saying there must be, but I don't think people are sufficiently knowledgeable to understand the truth, to decipher the truth and find out the truth. So we have an idea what is the correct, what is not correct, but let the information flow without any interference through the state, through private way or any other way. Let the information flow the way it comes. And then the major danger which we are witnessing today is criminal defamation. So media, it's a lot of people do. We have in the past also series of important cases where powerful people, as Sudhanshuji has mentioned, powerful people have used the tool and invoked the section for criminal defamation, and they filed the cases before the High Court and Supreme Court. And recently in the Republic TV channel, I'm not justifying or I'm not saying something, but what we have witnessed, the series of cases for the G News reader and the Republic News reader, which had said something related about in one incident, it was related with the Palghar incident, and second incident was related with the terrorists in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And we all were surprised and shocked. More than 50-60 cases were filed in different places throughout the country, and that creates some kind of pressure tactics. And there are some kind of phenomena which is common, which we don't need to elaborate, but we see these kind of tactics. So courts should also be little bit liberal. Courts should also discourage this kind of practice where people are using or resorting a tactics to arm twist the media houses or media. I know that like what many speakers are that media is run by the business houses. It is like an industry. Today it is not like the what during the freedom movement time. It has changed a lot. It's like it's a business, it's an industry, and where a lot of involvement, like money is involved, and there are interest is involved. So, but still, what we want, we are getting every day. Yeah, and I'm sure that gradually things will change, things will refine, and information will. But any attempt to block that will jeopardize the entire access. So, people's right to seek information, people's rights to know, that will be jeopardized. The moment you regulate, there will be no end, and it will continue, and it will create havoc. It will create a problem. Let me come to the other 2-3 parts which I have in my mind. That's like what we see, that the rights which are mentioned under the Article 19(1), freedom of speech and expression. This right is also very important rights mentioned under the all human rights instrument. An interesting part is Article 19 we have under the Indian Constitution, Article 19 under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. All Article 19 talks about the freedom of speech and expression, that is there. So we see that Article 19 which we have in the Constitution in the same place under Article 19 under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the third is the under the International Covenant and International Covenant and Civil and Political Rights. The next question which we have, whether right to freedom of speech and expression, right to know, right to seek information is absolute right, and it should be absolute right. And if it's absolute right, which is not in the Constitution, there's a limitation is there. But should we make an attempt, or should other jurisdictions, other countries, they treat these rights as a very fundamental and absolute rights and cannot be suspended. That has to remain active in all situations. So there may be occasion where the states are compelled, like we have under the Constitution emergency provisions. So there may be occasions, and then it also Constitution permits for the suspension of the Article 19 in time of a state of emergency. And even after the 44th constitutional amendment, which has introduced a new element and says Article 20 and 21 cannot be suspended. However, Article 19 remains as it is. So Article 19 enforcement of article rights can be suspended or limited in time of a state of emergency. In extreme situation, in an emergency situation, I feel that this right has to be respected. This right has to be remain untouched. It should not be disturbed. It should not be suspended. Enforcement of the fundamental right to information. And so if human rights perspective, I see, though even under the international instruments, no international instrument has made freedom of speech and expression as a absolute fundamental rights. It allows a state, international human rights instrument, regional rights instrument, also permit a state to suspend in time of a state of emergency. If a state wants, the state can put a condition, a state can limit. So exercise some kind of control is permissible under the international treaty. The current situation which we are facing is it's a public health emergency of international concern. So what we are in the COVID-19 is a public health emergency of international concern. So the COVID-19 is not the concern of the one state. As I discussed earlier also, when it's a right to health comes, it's in most of the cases responsibility of the state to take care of the health of its citizens. So it's the primary responsibility of the state. But there are situations or there are cases, even if a state gives its best effort, but it's exercise will be not of any help. So in such situation, international cooperation becomes very fundamental and very important. International cooperation becomes very fundamental is there. What happened in the entire case, and that Trump, that is the ground. Trump, US President Trump off and on gets upset because information was not shared by the China in timely manner. Information was squeezed. Information was suppressed regarding the coronavirus COVID-19. We all say that China has played very dubious role. We have all understanding. Had China informed us in month of November that this virus is going to affect all human beings, it is spread through the human to human body touch or this kind of thing. But China lied for many. So just you see the danger. The state which doesn't believe in the freedom of speech and expression, which controls the freedom of speech and expression, and only the information which state wishes to send outside can cross the international border. So within the border, it regulates, and outside also border, it regulates. So entire information related with the COVID-19, China has played very dubious and dangerous role in this particular. So we had never gauged, we never were able to understand the intensity of this COVID-19. So we fail to gauge, we fail to understand what is happening. We just realized, our Prime Minister also realized that social distancing will help this problem. But we realized that there are a lot of things which we should have taken on timely manner. Had we stopped like people coming from China in January itself, things would have been different. Had we taken so international travel, if WHO would have so WHO is the main body, WHO could have alerted the world. So WHO has an obligation. China has an obligation under Article 6 of the International Health Regulations 2005. So China has a regulation in case of pandemic, in case of epidemic, all states, not China, to inform the WHO, okay, this is the situation we are facing. And accordingly, WHO could have, all these states. But WHO also declaring the pandemic, declaring the public health emergency of international concern, it took many months. It finally declared on the 30th January 2020, 30th January 2000. Declared on the 11th March 2020. You see, the WHO had, so just suppressing the information, and that is impact, it's a danger which we all are witnessing. Had China said, so that is one point we can understand here. Democracy play very important role. If had media been given freedom in China, this information would have come long time back to us. But since China is not a democratic country, democratic principles are not followed, state control mechanism. So those who are contemplating, those who are expressing their view to regulate, they may rethink the danger of regulation. China regulated, and now more than 3 lakh people have been already died due to COVID-19. So today we are living in a different world. I will just say with one point and then I'll end here. So I see that we have understood, we have deeply, clearly understood that right, freedom of speech and expression, freedom of press is very fundamental for a survival of a democracy, for independence of judiciary, for protection of the rights of the human being, protection of the rights of the individual, protection of the rights of the other jurisdiction also. So freedom of press is very fundamental. Any attempt to regulate is a dangerous step. What we have seen in 1950, the attempt where those who were involved in the Constituent Assembly drafting, they have also thought about, and that we are just facing. So luckily we don't have court also, and then government is also keen not to regulate. So I hope that will continue. So democracy is very very important, where for the freedom of speech and expression, for the protection of human rights and other things. I just want to end which Immanuel Kant had said. So Immanuel Kant, I just had limited understanding, but what Sudhanshu is he also believed long time back, which I teach in the Cosmopolitan. It's towards perpetual peace. In his book in the 1794, Towards Perpetual Peace, Immanuel Kant had said there is a possibility. There is a possibility of achieving world peace. There is a possibility of achieving world peace, but world peace will be only achieved if internally states are governed by the Republican principles. If they're governed by the Republican principles, and externally they are work as a voluntary league, they work like an peaceful association, that there is a possibility. And internally also respect for the human rights, and not only for the citizen but also for the foreigner. So he spoke about, so he also, so he other part, criticism apart, but he was great champion of cosmopolitanism. He believed in the global, he believed in the world citizen, and and he also gave a concept of cosmopolitan law. He said cosmopolitan law. So what is cosmopolitan law according to Immanuel Kant? What it says is a different from the, it's a part of the public law. So constitutional law, international law, but it's different. So under the cosmopolitan, according to the Kant, according to the cosmopolitan law, state and citizen, state and individuals both have a right. State and individuals both have rights, but individuals having the rights not as a citizen of the state, but as a citizen of the world. So you have a right, so we have citizen of the world. So he has under the cosmopolitan law, if it comes, it becomes reality, the citizen will have, is like an individual will have a right as a citizen of the world, not of the citizen of a specific state. That was his point which he has given. We see we are moving towards like, cosmopolitan, where interdependence have been increased significantly. And I think I just want to conclude that it's very important, media freedom. We all have to work towards for the ensuring that media freedom should be ensured. And even in time of emergency, it should not be limited. So that the state can always play important role to ensuring that right to freedom of press is respected in all time, all situations, even in extreme situation, it should be allowed. And I hope if it takes place, and that is the reason we have an idea. We look every moment to see how much like cases have appeared in India, abroad, and other things. We make a judgment. We do the study on the information shared by everyone through the various platforms these days. With this, I thank Amit, I thank Upasna, and all of you, especially Sudhanshu ji and Mohan Prasaran, and of course Anurag Deep ji is also there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for a very comprehensive and nice lecture, sir. You have covered everything in a very comprehensive manner. You have given a wonderful insight to the constitutional journey by referring important cases pertaining to freedom of press under Article 19(1)(a). Then you have made a very comparative study with reference to Universal Declaration of Human Rights and International Convention of Civil and Political Rights. And fortunately, I get to learn that Article 19 under all these provisions talk about the same thing. I was not aware about this fact. Thank you very much, sir. And there are other things that you have touched upon, like Republican principle, cosmopolitan laws, observations about Immanuel Kant. It's really very nice and wonderful lecture. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I open the house for question and answer session. So we will take the questions from our guest.
From the viewers, participants.
Yeah.
We already have certain questions with us. So let the participants put questions in the chat box, Amit, and then we can start with the questions at hand.
Yeah.
So this question is not directed to a specific person. So anybody who is interested in answering it can. So the question is, due to COVID-19, a few big media houses have gone into job cutting. Journalists were laid off, retrenchment taking place. What is the way out? So, any of the...
Okay. Sudhanshu ji, you want to answer?
Way out. See, this is dishonesty. I am very much disappointed that in India we have so much dearth of honesty that given an opportunity, you just use it as a technicality to perpetuate injustice and monstrosity. Immediately after the lockdown, it's not that the media houses incurred huge losses just in a few days, but I have got reports that so many people had to lose their jobs. They were told in very unequivocal words that you have to leave, we don't have money. So if we have this kind of this dishonest society, dishonest media houses, then what is the way out? Either you have to protect all kinds of people, whether laborers or anyone contractual employee, there has to have some law that you cannot just throw them out in a by giving a notice of 1 day or 2 days you should do it. No, that should not be acceptable. Some, because we lack work culture, we lack empathy, and we don't think that we owe a duty to the society. Unfortunately, we think even without throwing someone out, there is a notion that people who have employed you, they are doing a charity, and they always threaten, bahar kar denge. Why? It's not that you are giving money out of charity. Everyone is being paid for the work he or she is doing, and your organization is growing because of the work put in by those people. That is what Marx also talked about, surplus value. I'm not a communist, but there are certain things that we should discuss. That with the labor that I put in, or other employees with their hard work, they contribute to the growth of the factory, to the media house, or anything else, and you get a pittance. And the kind of arrogance that you display, हटा देंगे, ये कर देंगे, वो कर देंगे. No, you are not doing any mercy. It's not a mercy. Everyone is being paid for the hard work that one is doing. And if you are throwing out like this, there should be a consensus in the society. Those people should be ostracized and, if possible, punished by law.
I
Thank
would
you,
like
sir.
a little bit here. I think this is not only media house job cut is there in all field, like, and it has affected largely the poor sections of the society. The amount of services they rendered, physical services, and all of a sudden in this, it's like entire migration genesis, if you trace, it's because of the indifference towards them by their employer. They all have said कि हमारे पास कुछ नहीं है. People struggle. People, media houses, people, if they are like asked to go, they can run, they can sustain for 2-3 months. But this has become a common phenomenon. Even in the university, I heard many university has paid, and but they have also reduced the salary of the teachers, and they are contemplating. So this particular year, 2020, like the new academic year, so there are a lot of changes will take effect. So it's not affected one area, and I feel some way state is responsible. State in the first time made big like rhetoric, आप आदमियों को रखें, ये करे, वो करे. But there should be some kind of a strong mechanism to ensure that those who are, as Sudhanshu ji had mentioned, those people, those employer who have checked out their employee must face some kind of penal sanction, because their normal time they can remove, but in COVID time, the ground is COVID, then it should not have happened. But the state has also become like, more or less a silent spectator in entire crisis. So I don't see any solution, any law, because when the state has said 3 months, no rent, no job, all salaries should be paid. So state has official head of the state, like, state chief ministers, they have made promises, but nobody, when it comes to the implementation, it's become really hard, and it's very unfortunate.
Thank you, sir. The work conditions are actually getting they're getting worse day by day, because there was just a cousin of mine, she teaches in school. So in also, so the things are taking very bad turn. The parents are not ready to give the fees if their children are not going to school in summer halls. So the schools are opening the online classes in summer halls, and the students, the teachers, they are facing the brunt of it, and the salaries are getting cut massively.
Parents, we are also responsible. The moment we talk, why? Only because, like, we are teaching, we are taking part. Online classes already introduced. So I see that my son is there and whole day he's involved. I have no right to say, no, I don't want. So we take an opportunity not to pay. So our mentality, we have a problem. So we are like many people are claiming, they never realize that school receives money and then they pay to the staff, they pay to the bus driver and others. So many people say, bus is not coming, why should we pay? But like in college, school has employed 20 bus driver on a regular basis. They have to pay something. So we all have to play. Like we have also duty along with the state to see that
Right,
this
sir.
like to be avoided.
Right, sir. Thank you. So there's another question that we have. I think we'll just deal with two more questions and then wind up the session because we have already touched. So the other question is, what are the various mechanisms to control the menace of fake news, especially in the era of COVID-19?
Sudhamsuji,
No, it is a big menace, no doubt, because as I told you that it's not a new phenomenon, it's an old phenomenon. Fake news, this problem of fake news is as old as the hills. I have already discussed in detail that since the inception of civilization, we have faced this problem. Now, how to counter this Frankenstein of fake news in this extraordinary situation when there is a pandemic of COVID-19? Now, government is doing one good thing. There is a PIV fact check. They are sending that this news is wrong, this is fake, and that is being done on Doordarshan because whatever PIV says that we have checked the fact and it is wrong. Sometimes they say that the salaries of the government employees are being cut. It is a wrong news, and we telecasted that this is wrong. But if it is found that there is a malicious intent behind it, you want to calumniate a particular caste or a community or something like that, then that comes under the purview of the IPC. But you have to establish that there is a malicious intent. If it is an error of judgment, then I don't think any action should be taken. But if it is being done deliberately with the intent to traduce and malign someone, then the law should take its own course and people should go to court.
Right, sir. I think Mohan sir wanted to say something on this
Oh, yeah.
issue.
Not on this issue, but on Kant and specifically the comments made on Kant. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're.
Yeah. See, it could be the initial in the initial years of Kant. He was when he was formulating his philosophy of egalitarianism. That you have to understand cultural relativism in order to understand if a person has made a particular comment on slavery or even a particular race. As for example, if you see in that Huckleberry Finn novel, the Finn feels it his moral obligation to return the slave to the owner. So such was the cultural value of a particular era. So we need to understand that if a person is racist in his initial years and after 10 years he has written something on which the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the text of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be traced back to the second formulation of Kant's categorical imperative. And all those philosophies that he has developed, they are the foundation of modern egalitarianism. And this thing, and in the context of when I was saying that the personal freedom can be secured by within the framework of the state only, it's supporting supporting racist theory was irrelevant. That is what I wanted to say, and it's a classic case of fallacy of red herring. So, and another thing on Kant, from Universal Declaration of Human Rights onwards to the very foundation of morality, the very foundation of egalitarian moral approach, we found in Immanuel Kant. So when he talks about universalizability of moral maxim and the end of the humanity as an end in itself and not as a means to certain particular end, that is the foundation of dignity of human personhood. So there is a difference in the perspective of and looking at things, and I don't want to commit that discursive violence on the perspective that other person may be having. However, this is what I wanted to say on that point. Thank you.
One small rejoinder. He may have said certain beautiful things, and we don't have so much of time to go into an extended debate on this issue. First of all, Kant never recanted his position on race that he had taken, that only whites are creative, not blacks. Secondly, the great scholars and intellectuals, in order to sound credible, they always patinate their stance with many magnificent ideas which are very appealing to the society. And under the cover of those magnanimities and other things, you also push your agendas which are very dangerous. That is what I would like to say.
Yeah, of course. Those agendas, Kant was invoked by the Western world when after the World War only. Before that, they were never in favor of Kantian philosophy. They have invoked it, universal brotherhood and all these things only when they no longer had control over the colonies. You are right from that angle. But Kant himself cannot be blamed for that. This is what my point.
That is the perception, like Mohanji. Let him,
Yeah.
like, he has his view on Kant and you have your view.
No, it is on record. It is on record. What he has said about whites and
Yes,
blacks.
I know.
It is on record.
In 1780s he had written that, and in 90s he has written the other. 1790s he has written the other main work. Particularly the metaphysical.
I think the discussion between the panelists is giving us a new idea for a all the more jurisprudential webinar series. We can go jurisprudential.
Definitely, Upasan, that's a very good perspective that we all should work upon that. So
Right.
thank you so much, sir. We should proceed with the next question. I think we can
should,
take one
yeah.
more question, right?
Right. I was just
What?
there is one more question, sir, which is very pertinent. We want to seek your opinion on challenges faced by journalists in covering COVID-19 news. And one of the challenges, example, the Z News case where 28 employees were detected with COVID, and the media house was almost shut down, if I'm not wrong. So how the journalist can be, how should they deal with it?
No, you have taken the name of one particular channel because so many journalists associated with channel or working with that channel have been diagnosed corona positive. Now, something they said has boomeranged because they said something about Tablighi Jamaat, why so many people are allowed to assemble there. Later on, they themselves said on their channel that despite having these problems and infection, they are coming and working for the society. So that is in direct conflict with the stand they had taken in case of Tablighi Jamaat. You are saying that they should not have been allowed to assemble, and in your case, you are propagating their virtue that despite being infected, I am coming. And what happened? That they infected others.
Okay, sir. Another question, I think this would be the last question, sir. While regulating mainstream media, press channels, online news portals, etc., may not be required, is it not necessary to regulate social media, especially when in COVID-19 we have witnessed many fake news? So again, everybody is coming to the bit of fake news that we have discussed very extensively, but this is a different angle, sir, that how to regulate social media apart from the news media.
Everyone wants to control the media. That is the problem. When the Licensing Act was enacted by the British government, what was the logic? That since the printing press has been invented, there will be a lot of circulation of fake news. It will be misinformation, it will be disinformation, and so you need to take permission before printing something. And Milton's famous Areopagitica was written against this Licensing Act. How can you regulate the circulation of ideas or news? So right from the beginning, technology is taking big strides. So you have new technologies. Even the invention of printing press was taken to be the biggest revolution of that time because they thought that now knowledge has become so universal. It is democratic. Knowledge was confined to the elite class. Now with the invention of the printing press, it will be democratic, it will be universalized. And so there was a very deep worry. The government was so anxious to regulate it. Now you have the internet revolution. Now you have the social media. Many people say that newspapers and the mainstream channels, they are not giving a space to the underdogs, to the common people. So now at least you have a forum where you can upload. If you regulate it, it will not be good. The danger is this, that you are uploading fake news. Now you have to shift the weight from the flag, because if everything is to be regulated, I don't know whether there will be any freedom left in the society. It's true that in a newspaper or in a television channel, there is a gatekeeper, and gatekeeper is responsible, because if something is printed or something is telecast, then the gatekeeper is accountable. He will ask, why did you allow it to go? On social media platform, you don't have a gatekeeper, but see the flip side. Everyone has got a platform. You are not, this freedom of expression is now the privilege of a few select people, the elites. They talk on television, they write for newspapers. What about others? Your articles, they will not even respond. You send something, the editor is so arrogant, he will not even respond to your article, not even send regrets. You will not be called for discussion on television channel. Where should these people go? At least there is a platform which is giving the opportunity to express themselves, because people want to express themselves. Everyone wants that there should be some platform, and I think that this social media will kill the mainstream media, because mainstream media is not giving representation to the every class and every caste, or whatever you say.
Thank you, sir. That was actually a very subaltern view to it, and I really appreciate. And responsibility can be more ingrained. Yes, sir. Definitely, sir.
Sudhanshu ji, I think gatekeeper liability, there was a case long time back. I'm not able to remember right now. Chatterley is regarding that is very strict. That should not be. But now we have a concept of intermediaries liability, and I believe Section 79 of the Information IT Act also talks about some kind of liabilities if putting. So there may be some kind of control is there, but I totally agree. It's not to disharm the reputation of any person. If fake news is perfectly fine, but it should not targeted any person. It should not harm the reputation of an individual, and it's not also used for the attacking the women and other things. Otherwise, this news, let it be, people can test, examine, and understand what is right and what is wrong. That I wanted. So I feel that intermediary social, so for the social platform, it has come for the intermediary liability, and that is the Section 79 of the IT Act.
Thank you, sir. With this, we close the question and answer round, and we will proceed with the vote of thanks. On behalf of all the members of ILEA and ILI, we would like to thank all the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedule and addressing all our viewers on this very important topic: law, media, and COVID-19 issues and challenges. Here, we would like to thank the entire ILEA team for their continuous help and support for the successful completion of this webinar. Also, we would especially like to thank our professor, our dear own professor, Dr. Anurag Deep sir, Associate Professor ILI, for guiding us 24/7 and for being patient with us throughout. Thank you, sir. We close this panel discussion here with an expectation that all our viewers will join us next week, also on Wednesday, to discuss and deliberate on environment and COVID-19. Our dear friends and colleagues, Ms. Surbhi Pandey and Ms. Bhavna Mehrotra, will be convening the session. We wish everyone a very safe and sound health. May we follow all the norms and collectively come stronger and better. Till then, please take care. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mohan.